Call to order this meeting of the Assembly Budget and Finance Committee, a committee of the whole. Introductions first. We'll start with Mr. Weddleton. How are we going?
Forrest Dunbar. Felix Rivera.
Croft.
Alex Slifka, Chief Fiscal Officer. Lance Wilbur, Office of Management and Budget.
Dean Gates, Assembly Council.
Good, and we'll have others introduce themselves as they present. It's got a number of items on this agenda, and we all want to hear the updates, so we'll jump right into it unless there's anything Assembly members need. Mr. Wilbur.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So on item 3A, sort of the impacts of how we're running the earthquake, the way in which we worked with the finance department and payroll and the utilities is that immediately after the earthquake, we set up what's called an internal order. It's basically a separate account where we ask departments to start tracking their costs, whether it's labor, non-labor, and contractual capital, inside a separate account. But they were consuming their 2018 budget while they were doing that because they had no other source. So the actions that you took Tuesday night allowed us to create a fund, and with your support and appropriation, in which we set up a separate fund with a different account. We have tested that inside our SAP process. The costs that departments have incurred, they're going to come out of their operating budget. They're going to go into this separate account. We'll be able to then separate their actual day-to-day activities and their costs from the events of the earthquake, and we'll be able to continue that into the future. The other thing that we've done and learned in this process, we've set up a process in the event of a future emergency, whether it's an earthquake or fire. The system is already set up to track it automatically out of their operating budget, so we've established a setup that way. I'll have to say that the departments have been great, both the utilities, while they've been working in their response to make sure the direct services are provided. The folks in their accounting sections and the folks in finance have been helping us to get those costs tracked. So as Mr. Slifka is working with the state and the federal folks, and so the potential for on how we get reimbursed, we actually have an accurate account of the separation of those. So I think we are in a good place right now as it relates to tracking the expenses for 2018, and for 2019, the activities that the account that you set up Tuesday night, that account will continue into 2019. It will not be consuming their 2019 budget. They will continue to track them separately. So that is where we are for item 3A, unless you have some questions.
I'll look for Assembly member questions. So in that separate account, do we get possibly reimbursed from federal or other emergency funds?
So yes, yeah, and that's the possibility of getting reimbursed is all dependent on the accounting of what we're doing and the eligibility of the expense.
Does it have like a copay? We only do 50%, or they come in and do 100%? So
typically, Mr. Slifka can correct me if I'm wrong, but with federal, state and federal actions required, assuming that we get presidential action that we have a federal emergency, 75% federal, 25% state reimbursement. We set up that ordinance in the event that we are not reimbursed. We have other actions that we can take to get reimbursed.
And the state has done the declaration, but the feds have not, or neither has declared it?
I believe the state has, the feds have not. So there's two separate steps of declaration. One is a initial response, and then the second is a recovery. The response is yes. The recovery we're still working on. The folks from FEMA are here looking at inspecting. They started, I believe, yesterday. They visited solid waste. They've been to Eagle River. They're looking at all of the stuff that you just saw in your previous meeting. They'll use that information in combination with the information from Mat-Su Borough. In totality, that will be the declaration for the state from the feds.
And the way the process will work is the state is the one that makes applications. So if you'll remember, the state very quickly declared disaster. The state then made application, which was then acknowledged by the president at the time, but that was just for the emergency. The critical piece for reimbursement is this next step. The state has been gathering information. We've been supplying them information, as has Mat-Su and others. They are then going to make application to the president, where the president has to approve this disaster declaration. The opportunity for approval for public assistance, which is municipality property, The threshold is 1.5 million, so pretty certain we're going to meet that. The big wild card, unfortunately, is for the individual where it's a maybe. There's no hard and fast rule, and if anybody was out in Eagle River last night and saw and heard the level of damages, the presidential declaration will be needed for that additional $17,000 worth of aid to come through. It will be needed for the Small Business Administration to turn on their loans. So
17,000 per,
person.
yeah.
That's on the individual program. So to the extent that anybody wants to bombard the president with a positive message, that would be a good idea. But just from a timeline perspective, so the application will go in by the end of the year. Hopefully, shortly thereafter, the president makes declaration, and then all the hard work that staff has been doing to track expenses will then go into work. We'll have to make application. We believe we will get mostly reimbursed. The $30 million that you have set up, while we're in the process of getting reimbursed, 20 of that 30 we're probably going to borrow. So really, how much money is going to actually leave the cash pool is some number less than 10.
We've been joined by Mr. Trainee. Are there any questions from Assemblyman? Well, they're thinking about it. So what was the effect, if any, of that first declaration? It sounded like the first state declaration that the feds stamped and approved didn't do much.
So it got FEMA out here,
Okay.
right? And what it did do is it did turn on the state 17,000 individual assistance and did turn on the state public assistance. But as we know, the state is not loaded with money. It's really the feds where all the money is, and that's why it's so important for this second piece to happen.
Gotcha. Yeah, Mr. Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So do we know how many individuals have filed with the state at this point?
The number we heard last night was over 6,000.
6,000. Thank you.
We will go on. Was that your presentation, or you have a separate? Yeah.
Just the financial status update. So the city is doing fine. Lance is going to talk about where we are in budget to actuals. I'm going to have Bliss Cruz stand up and give you a brief synopsis of where we are from revenue year to date.
Hello, I'm Bliss Cruz. Basically, based off of the information available through today, there is a projected year-end variance of about a negative $1.1 million for fiscal year 2018 actual and budgeted general government 100 fund revenues. This is about $400,000 worse than last month's projection, and it's a result of changes in several accounts. And that's basically the overall summary, and being respectful of your time. If you do have additional questions, I can probably answer those.
What's the big ticket item that we missed on our projections? You always do somehow, but what accounts for most of that?
The majority of this from last month to this month was investment earnings.
Mr. Trainee?
How did the tobacco tax fare? How many were expected it, or is it lost?
Tobacco tax is pretty much right on track. It's about projected to be a $300,000 variance negative. It's about $100,000 worse than last month, but it's highly variable, so anything can happen in the month of December.
Okay, we should get, what, about 20 million in
I
from
think
it?
it's
24.
22 million, I believe, Lance.
Because I remember when the state went on, they were saying we're going to go to Waukegan to buy our tobacco. It's nice to know they're not doing that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, I hadn't heard that number in a while. We the city, raised $22 million on this cigarettes.
Absolutely. So, or when people tell you we're going to go to the valley, it doesn't happen. They said the same thing with the fuel tax. If
Correct.
you don't mind, Mr. Chairman, what's the fuel tax running? Are we still projected our target on that?
I believe we are a little bit ahead of target. I don't know that I have that exact number. Actually, I do. We have we're projecting a small $50,000 positive variance.
But the total is
The total, just bear with me one moment. Our budget is 11.6.
million.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Quinn Davis?
You can feel free to tell me if this is off topic and we should talk about it another time. I've had a number of people in my district say, yeah, we passed this fuel tax, but my property taxes went up. I usually tell them, well, I'm sure it depends on the situation. I don't know how the property's assessed. But we're hearing that again. Can someone just explain what happened to that money and what's going on?
So I'll start. So first of all, the gas tax is under the cap right now. All of that $14 million that Chris just mentioned is under the cap. When we gave the presentation about the effects of the gas tax, it was, on the average home, which is about $350,000. There is a threshold when you get to probably over $500,000. The tax break that you might see as a result of the gas tax is not going to be as great as it would be, if at all, if you have a lower property tax, lower or the average price of a home.
So, but you expect, it's okay if I follow up, so you expect then that anyone under 350,000 should have actually seen?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, that was the estimate that we provided. And there's a lot of, and I've mentioned this before, there's a lot of variables. It's not just a matter of the value of the home or the tobacco and all of the other revenues that are under the cap. It also affects the total assessed valuation of all of the properties in the municipality.
Well, yeah, and every year we have bonds that add to the cap. We have emergencies that can. All of that money went to defer property taxes, and so property taxes did not go up as much as they would have, or in some situations would actually go down. They reduced it. It doesn't necessarily mean that an individual's or even the whole property tax level. It will mean the property tax level you would have collected went down. It doesn't necessarily mean the absolute amount.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Right.
Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Jerry. Other thing too, is on the bonds, we have no control of the bonds. Those that keep it going to votes and those taxations themselves. So we got no control on the amount of money going into bonds. That's the voters this April and last April. So then you need to keep in mind when they're saying our property taxes didn't go down. If you voted for the bonds, then you made that choice yourself.
So,
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, there's a couple other clarifications. Is that, as I mentioned, there's a lot of moving parts, and the amount that we were referring to is the amount that's affecting to general government. If the school district, they can weigh in and they can modify that out. The other thing that can influence, if you're at a limited road service area and you want to adjust your taxes separately, then because the estimate we provide is for basically the 5 major areas, not limited road service areas. So they may assess themselves even more, and the amount in which they may assess themselves could affect the offset of the property taxes. It depends on how they individually would act. So, the difficult thing about making the projection when we give the averages is that sometimes there are so many variables.
How about this question? All of the $22 million of tobacco tax and all of the $11.6 million of gas tax went to offset property taxes.
Correct.
Not much higher. Any?
I guess, and I'll just
Yeah,
finish
sure.
by saying an update on the audited financials. All the work has been done. We are now giving a fairly firm date that the audit for 2017 will be delivered on January 15th, 2019. What was delivered in time for the
January what? I'm sorry.
January 15th.
Okay.
What was delivered on time was the audited financials of ML&P that were required under the agreement we made with Chugach. Going forward, that same agreement mandates that we have to deliver the audited financials for 2018 by July 31 of 2019, which is putting us back on track.
That's
So-
when we normally have a
That's
CAFR?
when we normally would have it done. So we are working through a process where we are going to apply some additional bodies to get ourselves back on track so that going forward, you will be receiving the financial information you would expect at the times you would expect, and really most importantly, that when Mr. Wilbur comes to you with the first quarter revisions, that stuff will be timely and accurate.
So we have a meeting on the 15th. You'll have by our meeting a audited and ready for primetime CAFR.
Right.
Of 17.
For 2017.
Mr. Trent.
How's our overtime running for the fire and the police department? In years past, we've had a problem running hot.
So they are running some overtime, but I think they're not the only department is, but let me check, give me a moment. Actually, fire is doing very well, and police is over, but I suspect that most of the police overtime, they had about like $300,000 in labor just right after the earthquake. And again, they were consuming their 18 budget, so I assume that some of that stuff will back out.
Lance, what about that little accounting problem we had last year? That's not happening this year, hopefully?
Little
Cost
accounting
millions of
problem?
dollars on little
No,
accounting problem.
no. We've that has been rectified.
Thank you, sir.
That's all I have.
All right. And then, are we to see then, Lance?
Yes.
Updates on
Sure.
17, 18, 19 budget? Great.
So I think Mr. Slifka is giving you an update on 17. Looking forward to having that CAFR. As far as 2018, as of November 30th, we were 92% through the year, and the departments were about 85% spent, and that included their encumbrances. So departments are doing a very good job. I think the only the couple departments that are really at the top are IT. And I think that's pretty much it. The rest of the departments are doing very well. They're at the 85 to 90%. So I'm very proud of the departments for keeping track of their expenses. Obviously, the month of December will be a little bit different. We've had some more snow. They've had some other activities, but the earthquake expenses will get backed out. And then
These are numbers through 12/1?
these as of November 30th.
Or no, well,
Yeah, 12/1. Budget's
and
actual reports.
92% through and only
5% spent, including encumbrances.
Seems like as you get later in the year, that number should get, closer. We'd like to see a little less, but I guess I wasn't expecting that much less. You think it is going to amount to a real savings, or it's really just lagging?
I think it's going to be some savings, and I do believe there's some lagging. But I don't believe we're going to end at a 5% difference between the end of the year. But typically we're at, a half to maybe 1.5.
Right. And then when will you be able to give us numbers that close out the year? What's a good date to have one of these meetings in January or?
So it will take us, and it'll take at least probably through February. And here's the reason why: because the expenses that occur in December we pay in January, so we need to make sure. Sometimes we do the activity, but we don't get the invoices until January, so we pay them. So we need at least 6 weeks sometimes to make sure that we have an accurate close of 2018. But on January, or at our meeting in January, I'll be able to tell you at least at that point how we're doing.
Mr. Trainer.
In the last decade, most administrations have sent messages out to departments, don't spend your money, cut back 5 or 10%. Has the administration sent that message out to the departments? So that's what we're seeing. They're following your guidance to use less money, or is it just because of how it's working out?
So I haven't given them any guidance as a group. There are always departments that I keep track of, and I meet with them monthly to make sure that they're staying on track, and so far they are.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Anybody else? Does that conclude your, did you
So-
have anything on 19?
So just to let you know, on 19, we are preparing, we've got a schedule out for the 2019 first quarter budget revisions, and there's a lot of involvement primarily in finance, but they are aware of the calendar, and so one of those things is to have an estimated projected fund balance as it relates to 18, and we're doing everything we can to make sure that that's available when we present it, and so that's all I have on 19 budget.
You guys might have a first quarter budget revisions. Mr. Channing?
When are we looking at the first quarter budget revision coming to the summit? Because we've got a lot of assembly members, myself included, they're leaving the body. And I don't want to have a brand new assembly member or a couple of us there. You're going to be gone. Have to deal with this issue. Can you get the budget revision to us before we certify the election?
Through the chair, one of the things that we have to have when we prepare a first quarter budget revision is the results of the bonds, because we need to include that debt into when we create the tax cap. So I don't know if we could move it up a little bit faster, but I'll talk to my team and I'll work with Barbara and Desiree to see if there's an adjustment. But there's a couple things that we have to know. We have to know how 18 is going to close. We have to know how the bonds are going to turn out, and those are the two important things. We're also, the other things that we depend on is the assessor to give us assessed valuations, and then they have basically until the first week of March or the middle of March just to get us that. So there's we can struggle with the calendar, but we'll do the best we
If
can.
you'd work on as much as you
Yep.
can, because I don't want new assembly members to come in. The first thing they deal with is first quarter budget revision with no background on it. so
And-
appreciate that.
Yep, we'd be glad to help them out too.
Thank you.
I think that concludes item 3C. Thank you, Mr. Wilbur. Is Mr. Clouda here? Great. Thank you for your service on the Budget Advisory Commission. You want to maybe sit there? And do you have a presentation or just want to talk this?
I am going to just give a verbal report. So I'm Nolan Clouda, and I'm the chair of the Budget Advisory Commission. I've just been elected to that role at our November meeting, so I'm pretty new in the role of the Budget Advisory.
How long did Al have it? Al?
And Al had been there. Do you know how many years actually?
Like 6 or 7.
You're replacing a legend, yeah.
So I was going to mention that
He was only a
certainly
chair for about a year, though.
we.
He was,
Even though she's on there.
had been in and out, yeah.
Yeah, we certainly appreciated the leadership that Al had provided in that role, especially in subjects like the fuel tax and other areas. So we're a fairly new. Most of our membership on the commission is fairly new at this point. We have had there's been some folks that have termed out and some new folks that are at the table, and so I've only been on the commission since January, and I'm actually one of the more senior members. But we do have a really excellent group of folks that represent a pretty good cross section of public sector, private sector, and government as well. And a group of about 4 of us have specific experience in economic development and in economics more broadly, as well as a kind of a smattering of some public finance experience too. And so we're a really strong group as far as discussing and debating policy, and we really want to utilize that skill set. Some of our recent actions that we've taken, we did provide some input into the budget that was passed. We offered a resolution. A couple of the things that were priorities for us were locating and sourcing additional budget to deal with homelessness, which I know that a lot of members of the Assembly have voiced similar issues throughout the process. We also voiced our support for bond issuance that reflects the true cost of infrastructure, the real inflation-adjusted cost, and having that comparison rather than the nominal cost of bonds being retired. So we really wanted to see funding that was commensurate with the infrastructure needs. We've also recently we followed the DML&P merger throughout the process. I attended the Enterprise Utility Committee meetings, and we received regular updates from Assemblymember Dunbar and from Mr. Wilbur as well. Our group was pretty broadly in support of the deal as it was structured. I know a lot of scrutiny, from a lot of directions went into that deal. We didn't pass a resolution or anything like that, but we all expressed mostly pretty solid approval of that action. So as far as some upcoming actions that we're taking on, we're going to be reviewing the alcohol tax at our January meeting. That's something that's a high level that we all have a high level of interest in seeing revenue sources for the municipality and vetting them from possible different angles, politically as well as their impact on budgets. And we'll also be reviewing the school district proposed budgets as well in January or February. We have a strategic planning session scheduled for the month of January as well, so that's a time for us to try to do that annually to really take a fresh look at our priorities and really be strategic about the year that lies ahead. And with that in mind, we are really keen on making sure that our efforts and our focus is something that is relevant and supportive of the Assembly's goals and the items that the Assembly needs to look at. I think we're a body that's really effective in the role of a sort of a think tank, of a better of policy ideas, of provide a critical eye, provide a lot of scrutiny to ideas that come up. And so we really want to be utilized in that type of a role, and so we're certainly receptive to requests that this body has as far as what we can focus on. So certainly open to any questions.
Appreciate that, Mr. Cheney. I'd like to ask, your resolutions are on your website? I can pull them off there, or what's the best way to get those that you've already passed?
We have them available on the OMB site.
Good.
And there, the commission is on, it's a link to ours, but I also believe it's on the mayor's
Look on
website.
yours. Great. Mr. Cheney.
We're actually dealing with the alcohol tax today to decide whether some voters tonight or not. What I want you guys to look at is if we do in fact do that, where you think the money should be going to meet the priorities of the city of Anchorage. Okay? Because there's a lot of different things that's got in that ordinance, and I want to know where you guys think the money should be going to. Okay? We appreciate that.
Is
And
that
also,
is that a bullet?
Yes, it is.
No, it's a
Oh.
pen. You're so.
All right, I'm sorry. My apologies, go ahead.
Where's your mind at? Other thing would be, we need some projection from you guys on the settlement of supply and power. Where should the summit move that money?
Right.
You know, I want to know where it should go, so long-term savings to the taxpayers of this town.
Certainly, Mr. Cheney, both those are really excellent pieces of information that I'm going to take to the group as well, as far as what we could, how the alcohol tax revenue would be disposed, and also the issue of the ML&P proceeds. I had understood that how the money is used is partly a function of what the interest rate spread is at a given time, whether it makes more sense to pay off debt or to earn interest.
I would get with administration on this, or resource. But you heard earlier when they talked about the tobacco and the fuels tax, we were told when we passed those, the world's going to end, we're going to go to the valley. As you can see by the projections right now, that hasn't happened, and it won't with this one either. So we appreciate some input from you guys on it. Sure. Thank you.
Man stays on message, doesn't he? Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm just trying to get a little feedback from you, and maybe you have an idea of where the committee has been on this idea. I actually got an email a couple of days ago that was extremely critical of the process in the Chugach Electric buyout of ML&P. They thought it was too secretive a process, and I couldn't count on my fingers and toes how many public meetings we'd had dealing with the buyout. And so I'm wondering, did you have committee members that felt like that was some sort of secretive process, or did you not hear any criticism like that?
In our discussions of it, I'm not recalling anyone feeling that way, indicating that we felt it wasn't transparent enough. We were receiving pretty regular updates. And I know that a lot of terms did have to be kept, somewhat confidential until they were ready for release. But at the same time, the outline of the deal was out there in the public from the beginning. It was just some specifics. So I personally, speaking for myself, I don't share that criticism. But I do think that with a deal of this size and complexity, it doesn't surprise me that some people are going to have objections to some aspects of it. I didn't feel overall that that was a majority viewpoint, but those are just my opinions. I can solicit more input from the commission about it if you would like.
Well, and if I could just follow up, so when you were having discussions in your committee, were the committee members that were being publicly critical of the process?
Not that I was aware of, no.
Okay, all right, great, thank you.
Mr. Dunbar.
Thank you, Mr. Croft. So I like the idea of the BAC as sort of a think tank or an incubator for policy ideas. And one thing that I continue to stress when I was giving you the updates is I really do want the BAC continues to look at the stormwater utility and the financial impact of that. And any additional input you guys could give us on that, I think would be great. The other thing that just occurred to me now is an idea that I heard just last month was that other cities are starting to look at changing the way they do property taxes, shifting the property, a portion of the property tax. You collect the same amount, but you shift the burden from improvements to the land itself. See what I mean? So the way that we structure property taxes now, in theory, disincentivizes building on certain plots, disincentivizes improvements because then your taxes go up. And there's a way to structure things where it's revenue neutral and you shift more of the burden onto just land and less burden onto buildings. And it's a new idea. I hadn't thought about it before, but just to put that out there, because I know there's a number of people on the BAC with economics background, something to just think about, consider, maybe something, and one thing you might want to explore in the coming year. Sure.
Yeah, and through the chair, I think that some of the logic of that would be that it doesn't disincentivize certain types of improvements, including things like housing, where Anchorage has a shortfall in a lot of ways. I think that that's something that really should be looked at, and I appreciate that input. I think that's something we can talk about.
And the example they use that I think is really on point is the surface parking downtown. We have these large empty surface parking lots downtown, and they are a horrible misallocation of our land resources. And is there a way that we can change the tax structure to incentivize those being turned into basically anything else that would be more useful, other than a smoke ball ground? So.
Right. Yeah, the stormwater utility would partly get at that issue too, I think, but I certainly see where you're coming from that. Thank
And thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Oh, did Mr. Falsey want it? Yes. Yeah.
Quickly follow up on that. First, I just want to preview, I think that's going to be a state law change. Most all of the way we do property taxes is set by state law, so I believe that's what that regime. We're really just making a pitch to Juno just to manage expectations.
But they've done that before. BAC has asked us to do that before.
Yeah.
We've got things changed.
And the second is I'm very excited that Henry George can now become part of our conversation. So just as Ona got to talk about Wikipedia Henry George, the land tax was the vogue idea of the 19th century.
We got that.
Everything old is new now.
And then, Mr. Carter, I asked in this budget discussion, I think it was a work session, but of Mr. Falsey, been asking generally, this administration came in and I think appropriately knew it had to increase the police department, and so has been either containing budget growth everywhere else or cutting, more often cutting, and maybe more recently just trying to contain. But I'd be interested in the Budget Advisory Commission giving us their view on sort of how much longer we can do that. And Mr. Falsey's answer was not much, or this may be the last one. But what's been the impact of that continued 5 to 10% cut often is asked in every other department except APD, and sometimes fire was held harmless. But so your guys' view on whether we've reached the end of that as a strategy for finding money to increase the police force.
Certainly, we can explore that a bit more, Assemblymember Croft. We are broadly of the opinion on the commission that we feel the constraint of the tax cap in certain respects that it causes that type of a situation to happen a lot where other departments get squeezed in. And so we are interested in ways that new revenue sources could be brought to the table, not at great pain to the Anchorage taxpayer, but new ways to get past some of those constraints.
Right. Other questions for Mr. Cloud? Well, like I said, we really appreciate your service. Thank you.
And thank you for the opportunity.
Next, we have Susie, Ms. Marshall, on IT SAP progress report.
All right. Susie Marshall, I'm the acting Chief Information Technology Officer. All right.
You have a presentation worth shutting off the lights?
Sure. All right. So let's kind of get into it. Basically, the Solution Manager upgrade, which we've talked quite a bit about, is complete and working great. And what that did is it moved us to a new version of Solution Manager, which is our change request management tool, ticket management tool, documentation management tool, and it also removed the need to have an application lifecycle management tool. So we upgraded and then we removed the software out of our bin of change management tools. We have more features that'll be turned on in 19, and it was installed on premises. So I know we talked about it a little bit, just kind of that was an update there. Big news is we also did a huge application upgrade, and that was completed on this Sunday and put into production. And I was on schedule, and so far it's been a big success. And basically we had regression testing, so go ahead. Oh, I thought somebody had a question.
But I'll use that break. So I thought we just got in. We already got an upgrade. Like every time I turn on my computer, we have Microsoft upgrading. And
Right.
we had an upgrade on SAP.
Yes, the interesting thing is we actually had not had an upgrade since 2013, and so
We didn't have it. This is an SAP upgrade.
yeah.
So the system that was purchased at the time of purchase is what is installed. So it was 5 years old while it was being implemented, and the upgrades that had gone through, you know how you get the iOS upgrades on your iPhone that come through maybe a couple times a year, all of those upgrades that had been coming through while we were working through implementation were not installed.
We held off and did a big
Correct.
upgrade.
Yeah.
So this was a system-wide upgrade. This is a very big deal for everybody who has lived through this SAP process. Susan
Maybe I
can
feel
tell
like
you
it's
more about
recent.
it.
When did we first purchase SAP? It was
2011.
2011.
yeah. Okay. Well, All right, guys.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mayor Sullivan.
I'm sorry. Mr. Trainee would like to remind us which administration it was purchased.
Well, we all know what administration is, we don't talk about them anymore. But the thing was, with this program, Gwen Mackey bought all the updates. So every time they do an update, we're gonna be sending to the system to upgrade our current system. So we're not gonna have a case in which we've got a 3-year-old computer system.
Right.
Because part of this was to get the periodic updates, this one and then once another one, 6 months or a
Yeah.
year,
Yeah.
quarterly,
Yeah.
whatever it is, we'll update the whole system automatically.
Okay, so this was, as updates go, a big one.
It's huge. Yes.
This is the biggest, this is the entire system being updated with 5 years worth of backlogged updates.
Patches.
Pieces and parts of it that were required for tax reporting and other necessary functional needs were pulled out of the upgrade systems and put into the system as necessary, but everything else was held off on the side because of the concerns with the issues that it could create or more breaks that could be caused. If it was not absolutely necessary, it was held off to the side. So this many upgrades were implemented over time, and this many stood off to the side waiting. And that entire list was implemented. Susie's team did an amazing job.
We did it.
Anecdotally,
It's good.
from my position, from our position in senior management and up on the 8th floor, when things are bad, it comes up. We hear it. People come to our offices and say, oh, this is really not going well, we're having a problem, and that happened a lot during the SAP process, a lot. I didn't even know this was done. I mean, I knew it was happening, but by the time it was completed, I had to confirm with Susie that it was done. It was done, right? Did you finish it?
That
Yes,
is kind of the
done.
highest praise of an IT upgrade, is I
Right,
didn't even know it
didn't even
happened.
notice. Yeah.
But the
Okay.
users do feel it. We've heard from other directors and managers in their departments, oh yeah, it streamlines this, piece going into that piece, and you can see it in the interface that we now use. So this is a very big deal because it was done by all internal people with a little bit of contractor support, and the team that is in place in charge of SAP and within the IT department, Philippe and Susie and everybody who worked on this project did a really good job. The subject matter experts who have been tasked with working on SAP for the last 7 years, the ones who have been here from the beginning, I asked one of them last night, one of the ones who was very straightforward with me, and said, how did it go? And she said, it was great. It went really well. We had a couple of hiccups, but we figured it out, and it was good.
Susan, we jumped in and preempted you, but how much of the ongoing glitches or problems with SAP do you think that fixes? It maybe it doesn't, it just prevents future ones.
Yeah, I wish I don't have a good answer on that one yet. But it should, and with all the testing we've done, it should prevent future payroll stuff. It should prevent future,
Whether it solves old, it'll prevent future at least.
Yeah.
It's hard to tell.
and get us up to date for sure.
The big difference.
Were you in, Suzanne, as well? So was it training then was different?
There's a major difference in this and PeopleSoft was, we would never update PeopleSoft. That system was so out of date. We hadn't done updates in 5 or 6 years. So you can imagine we got a system that's never updated. I mean, you got Microsoft, you see every update coming out. We didn't update PeopleSoft. And so we ended up with a system that had to be scrapped, for better or worse.
Yeah,
And they've done a good job with this update.
yeah.
Suzanne, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is great news.
Thanks.
Congratulations.
Thank
Great
you.
job. Can you explain number 3? I get the part about save the business
Yeah.
over 600,000.
Yeah, so there was a technology called N+1. So I can explain that. That would be, it's like taking our existing infrastructure. So you have servers like test environment, development environment, QA, and to do an upgrade without implementing the existing workflow that required those servers, you create an environment called N+1. And the SAP hosting environment wanted to implement that for us for $600,000, and it would have took a really long time to do. And we said, we're not going to bypass that, and we're going to repurpose what we have. We had a training server, we had a sandbox, and we decided we would just be innovative and try to do it without huge cost and plus one that they insisted we should do, but we didn't do it, and we still did it on time, and we didn't have to do this additional cost, and we did great. So the team did great. Is really the team.
Right, I think you're the only one who really truly understands.
I was like, I don't know how much you
I know
want
I
to do.
didn't. What the heck is a sandbox? I mean, I know what a sandbox is.
Right.
What's a sandbox?
If you think about it in terms of what an actual sandbox is, you
Yeah.
have children coming into the playground, messing around, trying things out, seeing what works and what doesn't work. That is what the sandbox environment is for SAP. You get into it and you sort of build things. It's the test environment.
Without
like-
screwing everything up.
Yes.
without-
Right, yeah,
Yes.
It's like a copy of the existing
Yeah.
one.
I'm still betting you're the only one here, but I know what I mean. Okay, and so something about the way you did that allowed that not to cost us $600,000?
Yeah, correct, yep.
Thank you.
So we've, you're welcome.
Wow.
Our technology team hit it hard and we figured out how to do it because it was a time thing too. And then just a whole bunch of numbers. So basically just even to do the HR upgrade, the small part, I mean, it's not a small part, but that was like 115,000 different objects we had to upgrade. So that just shows the scope. This really was a really big upgrade. That's all this is trying to do. The other thing that we tackled recently is, so the HEC environment, so that's our SAP hosts, so it's a hosting environment. So that's where our servers live in the SAP, we're called the HEC environment. It's HANA Enterprise Cloud. And when we originally signed on to the servers, we bought a whole bunch of servers, like access to them. And then as we realized,
We didn't buy them here, we bought access to them somewhere else?
and we paid, that was the contract, was for all these servers, and we realized that we weren't using at least 30 of them. So we decommissioned them. And so to decommission them, we were back and forth, we decommissioned them, and then, so now we're gonna be getting a savings of $40,000 a month because we're not using these 30 servers. So it's just another thing to, the team is really tackling all these costs, and we don't want to keep having these costs escalate. So this is a way for us to.
So it would make sense to maybe overbuy it first because you don't know what you need, but as you got better and better about what you actually needed, you were able to bring the
Yep,
capacity.
that's a good way to describe it. Yes,
And I don't care where these servers actually exist. They don't exist in Alaska, right?
correct. Yep.
Should I care?
Well, I don't think so.
It would be a good place for them, but diversify our economy.
Mr. King.
You were looking at getting a local server at one time, maybe having it on Fort Ridge. And,
We're still gonna, next year, we're gonna evaluate if we should bring it on premises or where else we could do this hosting, and so that it wouldn't cost us the amount of money it's costing us. So we, yeah. Staffing update. We talked about 9 new positions. Right now, we're about 60% done on that. We got a training manager who was hired, functional analyst for HCM, so that's the HR part. Philo is the accounting part. Interface lead hired. Developer lead's gonna come on in January. Report developer. We just interviewed our last person today. We hope to have a offer on the table and have them working by the 15th. And then we have 3 more ones. Change manager, the job is posting, and then the application senior analyst we're interviewing, and then we've got another offer kind of in flight.
That's 6 all within essentially a 6-week period. So you've been advertising those for a while, and then picking this time.
Yep,
And what's the eventual? So that's 9 new. Is that your target, or you have
that's the
others?
target. Yep.
And you think that saves us some multiple in consultant costs when we bring them in-house?
Yep. Correct.
2-1, 1.5,
2 to 1. I
3-1?
don't have my slide. I think it's probably closer to 2 to 1.
The least.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other assembly? Okay.
These, I mean, I think if you averaged out these salaries, they're somewhere in the maybe $50 an hour range. And the SAP and Peloton contract resources are anywhere between $120 and $300 an hour. So we have mainly over the last year, 6 months or so, been relying on Peloton resources, which are much more affordable than SAP resources for many reasons. So the 2-to-1 ratio is maybe not as high as it would have been 2 years ago, but it's definitely a cost savings.
Yes.
Okay.
Next big steps for the team is we're gonna make sure that the new hires, when they get on, I wanna make sure that all the system documentation is updated, and that way that gets them to understand where we are with all of our system. We're really focusing on training, we do an inventory of our training, updating our materials, and then new materials will be developed and delivered as soon as possible. We're going to focus on reporting, making sure we understand our inventory of standard and custom reports, making sure we give proper access to reports for the business units, and then make sure that all the CAFR reports are developed as needed. It's a big priority. And then the other thing is to make sure that the new staff works with the existing consultants to make sure that we get the knowledge transfer, for sure. And then other efforts in 2019. So we're going to get into a mode where we are going to be in break, fix, and stabilization as priority. So if business units want to talk about enhancements, then we will have to have a conversation and an evaluation to understand if there's a true return on this new feature they want added or a system enhancement.
Who's the filter on that? Is that you turning it down, or?
That's what we're creating. It's really the business unit, like a board, and they act as yes or no, and they do voting on features, enhancements.
Because sometimes it's hard to tell a relatively high-level person who wants a fix that would
Right.
arguably make their life easier. No, it's not a high priority.
Right.
Which it's one of the reasons we changed the structure of the departments, was to make sure that Susie had a direct line into all of the other senior managers, so conversations like that could be level across the board.
No, you're not going to get your cool little fix. Okay.
Right. Okay, and then I talked about the hosting environment. We're evaluating whether we should keep with SAP or not. Should we bring it on premises? Should we use a different service provider? We're going through all those business requirements now, and then we're going to scope it all out and make sure that we're making a good decision.
Sorry to keep interrupting, but that's the
okay.
decision of whether it's we're renting, if you will, server space
Yeah.
from SAP, rent from someone else, or actually do it ourselves.
Yes, correct. Yep. We also, I talked a little bit about that N+1 environment. It sounds a little crazy, but we've talked about our team actually implementing that on premises so that we can have that environment at not $600,000 super reduced cost, and that we would be able to facilitate upgrades without disrupting a ton of business moving forward. June, we've got another upgrade to implement. We're planning on it, and then we'll have an HR PAC upgrade in December. And what the HR PACs, like when you do all the W-2s and the, all the reporting, all the federal reporting, those are all in the HR PACs. So those are, that kind of information gets put in December. We're also going to evaluate all the interfaces. We have some interfaces that have been a challenge, I think, specifically with payroll-related ones and insurance, and we want to make sure that we're not continuing just to do workarounds and make sure that our interfaces are functioning properly, and then figure out what is our future need with contractors given our new staff.
So there will be some. We're not getting to zero.
I don't think we'll get to zero, but hopefully a much smaller number for sure. And then if we can engage with somebody, with a vendor that would, we could call on them and say, hey, we need somebody that can do this new report. Can you have someone on loan that we could use for 2 months, as opposed to having someone on all the time? So that's kind of different.
Mr. Trainee.
The question is, you're looking to move the hosting to another site. Would you keep in mind earthquake conditions?
Oh, for sure.
I want to make sure they've got multiple redundancies, they've got backup power supplies.
Okay. Yeah.
Because we just went through a 7.0. If you don't have the environment for a safe, your data's all gone.
Yeah, agreed.
So I'm thinking that. I'm sure you've already thought about that.
That's okay, but that's a good reminder. Thank you.
I worked with IT for years in the military.
Oh, okay, yeah, totally get it.
Thanks.
Yep. Is there something else? Somebody else? No? Are we done?
Is that the end?
That's it, yeah, that's the end.
Fabulous, and yeah, we love that we are hearing first from you about SAP stuff instead of hearing it from angry constituents or employees, so that's neat.
Good. Yay, go team.
Yeah.
Maybe this is our job, but I think the public perception of SAP is lagging quite a bit behind what you guys are telling us. So I wonder what's our best opportunity to share that with the public? Is it you doing, sorry for even suggesting this, community council updates of like where we're at and how improved it is?
That's fine.
I just worry that they're not hearing the same good news, and honestly, when you mention SAP, everyone rolls their eyes so hard that we can't even have a conversation, and you guys know more of the details, so anyway.
It's a really cool idea. Doesn't it depend on whether he says we're actually getting the backlog? I mean, if we don't have good news from Falsey, then it's hard to come out and say it's all
And it
been
might not be
done.
right now, I just think that
Sometimes.
as this trend changes.
I think it's a great idea. And through the chair to Ms. Quinn Davidson, we've had that conversation. We've discussed it previously with Chair Dunbar and some other people. I think part of it is where are we with the payroll question, because that is the one that the bulk of the municipal employees and the population really care about. The general population, I believe, cares about the price tag that came with it, and that is the fixation that will always exist. As much as we can do to let people know that the system does work and is changing our business process and is creating efficiencies, we will be doing those things. I think what we wanted to get through this upgrade process to see where it's going, and we want our employees to be as comfortable as they possibly can be with the system, which means the training manager and the change management manager are necessary parts of making sure that that story is told well. So once we have those pieces in place, it's going to be one of our, main efforts to make sure that the municipality first and then the residents of the city understand that while this was expensive and difficult and we probably never want to do this again, that we got somewhere with it and it is successful and is creating efficiencies within our business process. We have people who are coming forward already saying, well, yeah, now, Mr. Wilbur knows in OMB, something used to take 3 days, now takes 30 seconds. So we just have to make sure that our people are taken care of first so that they feel comfortable and are on the same page with all of us.
And you can highlight that whole sandbox thing.
We love the sandbox thing. Mr. Trainer.
Hona's right in the respect that the problem was the Assembly administration was sold a $9.6 million program.
This administration? Oh, prior one. Okay, gotcha.
$9.6 million project. It costs 10 times that amount.
I understand.
And it's hard to convey to the public.
I understand.
It costs that much, but it's actually working.
I will say, and perhaps this is, bad to point a finger at, but the Assembly on Tuesday passed an SAP contract and did not pull it from the consent agenda.
I was thinking about it.
They're going to members right now.
I understand that. Mr. Rivera, Mr. Trainee, Mr. Croft, Mrs. France, everybody has pulled SAP items in the past.
Hey.
And I believe that it speaks to the information that you're all getting as we move through this process, the information that Ms. Marshall has been able to pull together and say, this is what we're going to go into for 2019, the understanding that that is part of the IT budget that was approved, that we're not working outside of that approved budget, that this is just the contract for 2019. I think the information and the progress that has been made so far, I'm hoping made the Assembly comfortable enough that the AM explained itself and the need for additional explanation or questions or concerns were not necessary.
You did a good
I
job.
don't expect that to happen forever.
That's the reason I didn't pull it, Donna. You explained it.
Mr. Falsey, tell us good news or bad news?
This is the last, hopefully, of the treading water updates. So I only have one slide for you today. The system is still producing the low level of underpayments and overpayments that the system itself is identifying. That hasn't changed. This is the number of pay corrections that we are receiving from actual employees. we are at the new normal, so it looks like we have confirmed that we went down from that over 200 to now something more like 120. So that upgrades that we pushed in R4 seem to have made a good dent. But I told you
back to the old normal?
we're not to the old normal yet,
Yeah.
and partly that was because I told you guys there's going to be a lag. So while Susie was upgrading the system, we couldn't process payroll defects. We had to wait for the system upgrade to happen, and some of that defect corrections depended on that upgrade working. So we processed more paper pay corrections than we received this month, but we haven't made rapid progress. This is the last of the treading water updates. I'm hopeful that now that that upgrade is done, victory is declared there, we're going to make more rapid progress. I will say, I would expect that the number for December, when it finally hits, because this is only halfway through the month, will spike a little bit. And the reason is, one of the system misconfigurations that SAP doesn't, one of the ways that SAP chokes is when we have people working overtime overnight. And we had a lot of people who worked overtime overnight. I saw Dusty at the assembly meeting, and I said, the good news is SAP is totally good with people working weird shifts in the middle of the night, and a little gallows humor. So I think that'll be a little bit of a mess, but I think we'll clean it up, and now that the HR support pack is finished, we're hopeful that we can really kind of close this chapter and stop doing
That's
it.
a partial number?
It's only through December 14th, so people are maybe wouldn't even have received their they wouldn't have fully digested whatever their paycheck was for November 30th yet.
And yeah, we're 2 months behind, so they'll,
Mr. Dunbar, yeah.
Thank you. Mr. Falsey, so you said this was the only slide, but there is another slide that you usually do that's interesting to me, is that pie chart.
Yeah, and it's basically the same. So we processed a few more paper pay corrections this month that we got in, but the numbers didn't really move. We're still 71% complete, and I forget what the other two numbers are. But largely that's because we make the most progress when we push a new defect through, and then we can go dun, 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 and we just didn't do that this month because we were, the same folks who do this work did that work for Susie.
Conclude your presentation. Any other questions? We missed it before, but I want to give a chance to do it. If somebody could hit the lights. If there is any public comments. Mr. Haberman.
My name is Eugene Collier. I represent myself, all the public press. It's an appropriate decision made by the governing body for elected public interest. I'll be very brief. I live in Lexington Valley. You've got a meeting scheduled after this, and one is at 2 o'clock, which is you're going to be doing interviews. So we're going to be hearing from different candidates who are taking a meeting about CC. And then after that, there'll be a later meeting at, I believe, 4 o'clock, and you have an agenda. And you basically have your vote, take off the office, and then you have public comment. I've expressed over the years that year after year, when these special election appointments occur, you have public comment after the fact, after you make the decision without bringing your public comment. So I strongly encourage you to change that agenda to allow for public comment before you appoint. And I don't mean on the 2 o'clock per se, because I don't even see an agenda showing up on site. I'm particularly talking about the 4 o'clock per se. But you should have an opportunity for the public to speak at the 2 o'clock too, after hearing all those interviews and statements, so they can have their say there, who's ever in the room. But also you should have, where you have an agenda for the 4 o'clock, you should have a place before you vote for people to say something so that they have a chance before you vote on the candidate. So both the 2 o'clock and the 4 o'clock. At the 2 o'clock, allow the public to hear those interviews, and then give them a chance to say something after those interviews. And the 4 o'clock, allow for the public to speak before you vote, and not after the fact of having a vote, oath of office, and then there's all this participation. That concludes my comments very briefly. Thank you very much. Happy holidays.
Any other public comments? Not seeing any. We'll talk more when we get there, but today, I think those are going to be hard 2, 4, and 6 because we've noticed them that way. So even if we get done with one or the other of them, it's inconvenient for us, I'm sorry, but if somebody wanted to show up at the 4 or the 6 and we had already started, I think it's good. So yeah, so we noticed them that way, we'll do them that way. And If there's nothing more than adjourn this committee of the whole meeting.